No heyo, no heyane, no hayoga, now we are heya. So welcome everyone to the Without a Whisper event. I hope everybody can hear me. I don't know, Mika, if you want to go ahead and start the event.
I am ready. So welcome everyone. We are very excited to have Sierra College's Gender Equity Committee, MiraCosta's Social Justice and Equity Center, and the Women Soaring Project present Without a Whisper film screening and panel discussion as a part of Women's History Month here at Sierra College this March. My name is Mika Lissick, and I teach history here at Sierra College, and I am one of 3 co-hosts for today's event.
And hi, everybody. My name is Megan Seeley, and I teach sociology and social justice studies at Sierra College, and I'm also the co-chair of the Gender Equity Committee. Welcome.
Hi all, I am Jane Lee-Scaife and I teach in the sociology department with Megan at Sierra College. I'm also one of the co-founders for the Women Soaring Project. And here with us today is my co-founder, Jackie Lowe, who teaches in the art department at MiraCosta College, and she'll be helping us moderate the chat box today. I want to start off the event with thanking our funders, and that includes Sierra College Library, Sierra College Foundation, MiraCosta College's Social Justice and Equity Center. We are extremely grateful for the generous financial support in making this event possible. So we're going to go ahead and move on to acknowledging the land for each of the colleges.
With respect, we acknowledge the Rockland campus of Sierra College as the traditional and unceded land of the Anishinaabe and Miwok peoples. The secret ravine, known as Anishinaabe as Hoyak, is home to an ancestral village site protected for generations by local tribe nations and their members. Sierra College commits to an ongoing relationship with the United Auburn Indian community and other local tribes, and to respect the legacy of the first peoples of this land and their future generations who are an integral part of the Sierra College community.
We acknowledge the Peyokochum, the people of the West, as the traditional land caretakers of the land on which MiraCosta College is built and its surrounding traditional cultural landscapes. Today, the Peyokochum are known as the Luiseño and are made up of 7 bands: La Jolla, Pala, Palma, Penchenga, Rincon, San Luis Rey, and So Boba. We, the MiraCosta College and community, acknowledge that we are visitors on Indigenous lands and pay our respects to the Luiseño, past, present, and emerging. We are grateful to have the opportunity to be part of this community in Luiseño territory and to honor their history, culture, and perseverance of spirit.
So now for the film. Without a Whisper, KONNÓN is a film produced and directed by Kochijuni Fox about the untold story of how Indigenous women influenced the early suffragists in their fight for freedom and equality. Mohawk clan mother Louise Herne and Professor Roesch Wagner shake the foundation of the established history of the women's rights movement in the United States. They join forces on a journey to shed light on the hidden history of the influence of the Haudenosaunee woman on the women's rights movement, possibly changing the historical narrative forever. This 27-minute documentary film will be followed by a very exciting panel discussion with our special guests from the actual film, as well as those in academia. Please enjoy the film.
So now we would like to introduce you to each of our wonderful panelists, and thanks for being here today.
Wow, I'm just still taking in that film. It's so beautiful. We're so very, very fortunate to have Mohawk Bear clan mother Louise MiraCosta Herne from the film with us today. Clan mother Louise is also known as Mama Bear. She is from the Ganyangahaga, also called the Mohawk Nation, located in upstate New York. She's a spiritual practitioner and a political leader who is well known for her work in empowering Indigenous women and youth. Also featured in the film and here with us today is Professor Sally Roesch Wagner from Syracuse University. Dr. Wagner was one of the first in the country to receive her doctorate in work on women's studies at UC Santa Cruz. She also helped establish one of the first college-level women's studies programs in the United States at CSU Sacramento, and she's taught women's studies courses for 50 years now. Dr. Wagner has appeared on CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, Smithsonian, Time Magazine, New York Daily News, and Ms. Magazine for her work. In addition to those in the film, we're very excited to have notable Indigenous women academics that are local to us here in California. Dr. Melissa Leal is from the Ohlone and Esselen tribal nations and currently serves as a tribal liaison for Sierra College in Northern California. She teaches in the social sciences, soon to be ethnic studies department, and the anthropology departments. She earned her PhD in Native American studies at UC Davis, and her research focuses on reciprocal relationships between hip hop culture and Indigenous communities. Finally, but not least, we have Professor Patty Dixon with us, who is a member of the Poma Band of Luiseño Indians. Professor Dixon has been teaching at Palomar College in Southern California for about 50 years now and serves as the department chair of the American Indian and American Studies, in which she helped to create. She also helped to develop American Indian departments at both CSU San Marcos and the University of San Diego. And in developing those various departments, Professor Dixon's mission was trifold: to tell the story of the American Indian, to ensure that their contribution is not forgotten, and to dispel any inaccuracies without them, all of which are well aligned with the goals of this film, Without a Whisper.
All right, I think one of our co-hosts, Jane, who has control of the PowerPoint, I think she's dropped off. Oh, I think someone's, oh, awesome, thank you. Great. So
what would be a Zoom presentation without some technical difficulties?
I know how oh, Jane is back, I think. Okay, great. All right, everyone. So as a gentle reminder, as we start this panel discussion today, please leave your questions for the Q&A sessions until the last 15 minutes of this event. You'll be prompted by Jackie to start posting your questions at that time. We just want to make sure we don't miss any of your important questions. So that's why we're asking you to hold them. Now we would like to officially begin the discussion with a very evocative quote from the film. It was mentioned in the film, history is not what happened, it's who tells the story. And this statement emphasizes the importance of people and power dynamics in the retelling of history. So for our panelists, in your opinion, what were the significant factors that ultimately led to Indigenous women being left out of the retelling of the women's suffrage movement in the United States?
I'm not going to answer that question, but I just want to start off by acknowledging and giving a big hug and warm thoughts and prayers to all of the Asian women in our country right now who are hurting, who are scared, and who need our love. So I just want to start with that, and then I'll let one of my wonderful, beautiful colleagues answer the question.
Well, I may answer the question, and thank you, Melissa, for sharing that moment with us, that we can all take a moment to reflect and think about what we can do to make the world safer right now for Asian women. And that really leads to my answer to the question, the racism of the movement. 1890, there were two women's suffrage organizations. One was more progressive, one was more conservative. Susan B. Anthony was part of the progressive one, but she really wanted just the vote, not all the other issues that the women were working on, from reproductive justice to violence against women to equal pay for equal work. She wanted to focus just on the vote. And so she brought together these two organizations, but it was really a takeover of the states' rights position of the the more conservative group, the American Woman Suffrage Association. The National Woman Suffrage Association was the other organization. It was led by Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the suffragists that got written out, which is part of the reason that the story got written out, Matilda Joslyn Gage. What happened after 1890 was that instead of working for the federal amendment, which the National was working for, the pressure began to, the movement actually as a whole, the National American, the merged organization, worked for the vote state by state, taking a states' rights position. Now, this was, of course, at a time when radical Reconstruction was breaking down in the South, and the attempt on the part of the federal government to protect African American men who had recently received the vote, it was breaking down. And the federal troops were being pulled out, and voter suppression was really moving into play, including the ultimate voter suppression, the lynching of African American voters and potential voters. So what happened then was, well, if you can give women the vote, why can't you take it away from African American men? Why can't the states do that? Focusing on the federal amendment kept the pressure there, but the states' rights that the National American began to practice led in this direction, became increasingly more and more conservative, and looking at, okay, where are we going to get allies? Once the federal amendment was finally voted out of Congress, where are we going to get the states that will ratify it to bring us to the sufficient number? They looked to the South, they looked to the Southern states, and they practiced racism as policy. They made the argument, give women the vote because white women outnumber Negroes and immigrants, and women's suffrage is a way to maintain white native-born supremacy. Taking that position, they allowed the states in their states' rights process to do whatever the state auxiliaries wanted to do. They were allowed, and did, some of them, to work for the vote for white women only, to segregate and practice the de facto segregation that the national organization was practicing. If your skin was light enough, you could make it into the conventions. If it was too dark, you were not allowed. The final thing is that they worked for voter suppression. They were able to, they were allowed to, and some of the state auxiliaries did. So Matilda Joslyn Gage dropped out of the movement. She saw the writing on the wall. She would not be part of that. She was probably the most progressive of the women. And she's the one who said, never was justice more perfect, never was civilization higher. Well, if you have racism as your policy, you're not going to remember and want to remember a foremother who made a statement like that about Indigenous women. And so Gage gets written out of history by the growingly conservative women's rights movement. And with her being written out, of course, they are not going to want the story of Native influence to be remembered. And I think that's the process by which it got written out. I'd love to say it was white male historians. Unfortunately, that's not the way that I read history.
I would like to add that it's also very much geographically determined. And as the United States progressed west, it had this old-fashioned idea of the frontier. And with the frontier idea, it was an unconquered virgin territory. It was a man's last opportunity to achieve his greatest dreams. And anything and anyone that spoke differently to it had to be obliterated. So while the East Coast is going through its development of its cities, is very complex interactions with all of its immigrants, the native people that are still persisting despite all efforts to move them are there. On the West Coast, as they keep progressing, is just one war after another. And with all these wars, you have this great loss of history of the women of all those different tribes. You have a great loss of the creation stories of those tribes. And you have them followed by these anthropologists who then look to see who the men are. How do they remember the story of the tribe? So that it's lost for so many different reasons. One being the women themselves. I'm from the West. I was born and raised in San Diego, California. Believe you me, to go to LA is going north and out of my territory. So I'm very local and very provincial. And I look to anything east of the Mississippi River as that cauldron, that mix of ideology and mistruths, half-truths of creating the history of the United States. And there was this deliberate effort by women themselves, as well as men and others, to wipe the native out, let alone the Indigenous woman. And it's only because Indigenous women themselves were innately strong and continue to tell their stories that it persisted. So that I think Indigenous women were attacked in a variety of different ways, but that they persisted. And that one way they persisted was to take the story and make it inbred into their psyches. And that made the world of difference, I think, for the story to reemerge.
I just wanted to give space if there's anyone else that wanted to answer from our panel. So the next question that we have for you all, and I see a couple things popping up in the chat, so that may connect to this next question, but it's also mentioned in the film that history was lived by several different races, but only told from one point of view. Such a powerful point. As a follow-up to the preceding question, do you think that there are other racialized groups in the United States, for example, African Americans, Latinas, Asian Americans, so forth, who have similarly been left out of the women's suffrage movement narrative in the United States?
I mean, I think anybody who's not white or whose story doesn't elevate white supremacy, that their stories are going to be left out, whether it's women's suffrage or, you know, just history in general. And I think we see in the chat that, you know, there was Black Women's Club movements, Ida B. Wells, Nanny Burroughs, just acknowledging people putting that in the chat. That, yeah, of course, like that's, to me, that question is very like, duh, right? Like we know, and not to say that that's a bad question. That's a question that needs to be asked, but absolutely everybody's story that doesn't promote that white supremacist history is left out, no matter what the topic.
As a follow-up question to that, would you say that in terms of being left out or excluded from this narrative of the women's suffrage movement, do you think that there were different ways in which that experience evolved for the different groups? And this is open to all the panelists.
I'm just going to quickly say yes, absolutely. I think in the film, and then just knowing a little bit about how Dennishoni people and Indigenous people from California, that this idea of feminism is really foreign to us, right? It's not something that we really think about because we come from a place where women are, like she said, you know, like Mama Bear said, we're the law, right? So being women is kind of separate from being the law, but it's also the same thing at the same time. There's an Australian Aboriginal scholar who wrote a book called The Land is the Source of the Law. And I think it really ties into like how women and the land and the law are all one thing, right? So I definitely think that we have different experiences when it comes to how we promote and or show, feminism, how we promote or show movements for women, for women's rights, for women's suffrage. I can't speak specifically, like even just with what's going on today with Asian American women and their role in the women's movement, is completely different or looks different than what we think of as feminism and women's suffrage, right? And that's a whole nother topic that we could give a whole class on, right? But just keeping it connected to what's happening, right now.
I think sometimes you have to be very careful. I agree with what Melissa says, but I think sometimes when I speak, or maybe other Native people feel the same way when they speak, we are over 500 tribes, and we come from so many different experiences and realities that, it's very easy to try to give like a broad answer that covers all of us, which may not always be the case. Yet there's so many similarities. And I think for many tribes, at least I know for my nation, the focus is on the community. And each of us has a very, very important role to play within that community, and it's meant to be complementary, so that oftentimes women women step forward, not because they're trying to do something political necessarily, but because it's the right thing to do, and that your job is to protect the family and to protect the resources of the family, and to do that within your clan. So I think you think community, and then you think who most needs to be protected, and it's often the young, and then it's also your land base. And I think the history of this United States shifted it a little bit, because it becomes very oriented as also to protecting literally a physical aspect of the land, as well as your traditions of your creation story and your lived realities, so that you don't see yourself being a feminist, you don't see yourself necessarily stepping up for women's rights. What you're doing, you're stepping forward as woman. And in our creation story, the woman does not have that powerful imagery as I heard spoken today in the film. Woman steps back, but in stepping back continues to nurture at the same time. So it's still there, but it's a different approach. But you never step forward to do this as a woman. And a real quick story. My mother's generation decided that it wanted to create an Indian women's club and join the General Federation of Women's Clubs, because they learned that white women got a lot of change done by pushing their husbands. And so they said, well, we should have a club, make sure we can get some things done for us at our schools. And so they did, and it almost fell apart the very first meeting, because none of the Indian women would allow themselves to be addressed by their husbands' names. Like, this is Mrs. Jean Dixon, this is Mrs. Robert Lofton. No, my name is not Jean, my name is not Robert. I am Lorena, I am Florence. And they said, yes, but in proper company, you give deference to, your husband. Oh no, I am me. And I'm here to speak for my children and my people. And you can address me as Florence or Lorena. This is my mom and her sister. And it almost fell apart, because as these women were bright, articulate individual women, they had done great things politically, economically in their local communities, but they never allowed themselves to be addressed other than through their husband's name in formal environments. And it almost fell apart. And I remember being so moved by that my mother and her sister were very simple people, but that their job was not to be there to represent their husbands, to represent their people, and they were individuals.
I think it's really great, Patty, that you brought up the importance of just being tribal specific in terms of experience. I just think of it with the Asian American experience as well, where we tend to be homogenized as a group in terms of our experience. When you actually break it down and look at the various experiences, the Chinese American experience can be very distinct from the Vietnamese American experience, who immigrated a lot later than the previous waves of Chinese Americans. So we have a very different experience, but also cultural differences in terms of what we're exposed to. In the Vietnamese culture, there's a story of the Trung sisters that is very much matriarchal, and but then it ends up being covered by the overarching Asian American idea of what a woman is in that sense. But so I think that's very important to be sub-ethnic in terms of your recognition of those distinctions. But just to add to the discussion, I have this question about this film is definitely a great step in revising history to be more accurate and inclusive. But what else do you think needs to be done in order to successfully reinsert not only Indigenous women back into the history of the US women's suffrage movement, but also just Indigenous people in general into US history? So aside from the film and Dr. Wagner's amazing books as well, what other strategies are there?
I wonder if Louise, would you talk some about the ceremony, the coming of age ceremony that's mentioned in the film?
Yeah, Gwe, Sego, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here this afternoon with you in this particular topic, and I'm a little starstruck by all the brilliant women that's on the panel here with me, and you know, I'm not quite as articulate, but I think what's important is that history has been an imposter for a really long time, and we have to remove his mask and reveal his true intention and what it's done to this hemisphere, this place that we call America. And, you know, if common law is founded on precedents based upon what came first, and at the time of European contact, prior to Columbus, this was a matriline hemisphere or a maternal order hemisphere, vested in the mothers of the nations. And even the name America is a Mayan Aztec word. And Vespucci, a explorer, changed his name to be close to the word America, and he took it upon himself to say that he named America, but it's really an ancient word that Indigenous Mayans and Aztec people used to name South America. And hence, after they start drawing maps, they started to say North America and South America. But what's really more important for me is that the first paintings and renditions of who America is that was painted and taken back to Europe was the image of an Indigenous woman in the wilderness. And you can't find this image on Google. It's a hidden image in the Library of Congress in a temperature controlled room. You have to wear white gloves to see it and touch it. So it's hidden from view. It's hidden from the history. And even in some of the early maps, this Indigenous woman is on those maps. So for me, you know, with maritime law, as soon as you take 7 steps onto any piece of land, you're subject to the laws of the land. So I'm kind of sidestepping the question here, what you asked me to speak on, Sally, but I think what's really important here is that we go back to the origin of this hemisphere and what came before it. and even what became before that. So, you know, once you pull back the layers of history told from a patriarchal point of view, you begin to see something really beautiful, and you begin to see a truth that you've been waiting to hear for a really long time. And so in the Holy Trinity of Christianity, there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Well, the Holy Ghost is the mother. It's the woman, but they don't dare call her the woman because it creates fear. And as long as they keep us in fear, the less empowered and content we are. So for me, the image of America is vested in the image through the eyes of the first Europeans as an Indigenous woman in her total autonomous dominion as owner of the land. And even in my own Haudenosaunee stories, we talk about how our peacemaker came here and vested the title of the land through the lineage, to the matrilineage of the mothers of each nation, and that the status of her children would follow her. That's why all my children, I'm Bear Clan, so they're all Bear Clan. I don't take my husband's last name, you know, so if you have your husband's last name or your father's last name, that's a patriarchy, that's a paternal order. And that's the system that's been suppressing us for a really, really long time. So moving forward, as you know, we try to peel back the layers of an incorrect history or a one point of view history told by the people that had the power of the pen and who controlled the narrative to make them supreme. So, you know, we get to this day and age where we're beginning to understand why the United States government, and where I live, I have to deal with the Canadian government too on our northern border. So, you know, you begin to understand why they legislated laws of termination or genocidal acts upon Indigenous people. Because if they can take the hearts of the mothers and put it upon the ground, then you can say you've conquered a nation. Well, the hearts of the mother have never ceded or sold any of these lands. And in Haudenosaunee law, you cannot sell land because it's your mother. And you cannot cede land because you don't have the permission of the women. So if there's any document that says it's a sale of land by our chiefs, it's null and void. If the women didn't agree, then it's null and void. So, you know, more importantly, on top of that is the laws that have controlled us to this point, which is manifest destiny, doctrine of discovery. And in order to repudiate those very genocidal laws that vested all the authority in superior white land owning men, which is very much written into the United States Constitution, is it, how do you repudiate that? Well, women have to step back into authority and they have to step back into their power. And part of that, what we've done in my community is we're re-educating, we're calling our children home from the residential school era, and we're bringing our babies home and we're wrapping them in our corn husk, and we're returning them to the breast of our mother, which is the earth, and we're vesting back in them their authority to belong here, to live here, to be host to all the immigrants that have come here. And we have original standing treaties that are just as good today as the day they were written, to say that all people who come to these lands are to be given shelter beneath the long leaves of the white roots of peace under our tree of peace. And that as long as the mothers of those nations invite you to take shelter, then you have protection under Indian nations. And that was the original agreement, is that we would navigate the rivers of life side by side, not to dominate one another, and that democracy and diplomacy would be understood in a way that it wasn't a ruling elite, but it would be understood that everybody was included, even the women. And so our own chiefs could not understand why they would be offered citizenship when they couldn't even offer it to their own women, or the right to vote to their own women. But there's a lot of history to unpack in a very short amount of time. And just for me, you know, it's not enough to talk about it. You gotta do something. And to me, culture happens inside the practice. So, you know, we reconstructed our puberty right, our coming of age. So when those young people have voice change, or young girls come into their moon time, you know, we take them under the wing and we begin to re-infuse their psyche with our own ways, our own language, our own stories, our own sounds, our own medicines, and we put them out to fast on the land and put them in states of deprivation through a guided process by loving elders, by knowledgeable medicine people, and we say, this is your identity. Welcome home to your mother. And so we love our children deeply and profoundly that way, and we also connect them to something greater than themselves. And we tell them, you're just a small speck in the big web of the universe and of the earth, but you still have a very important responsibility, which is to protect the earth, our mother. So we have this way of being familial, family. The brother is our son, the moon is our grandmother, the earth is our mother, and the four-leggeds are our brothers and sisters. And so even the bugs, even the small microbes around our rivers, we're all in relationship. So everything in time and space is connected. And so if we're gonna, you know, like I say, you know, this hemisphere, North and South America, is an indigenous woman. And you see her sitting on top of the Capitol building, invisible. But yet she has the people under her, and that's her dominion. She's looking out all over the land and saying, these are all my people, these are all my children. And she's intertwined with a European woman. But, you know, more importantly is her essence is still here, it still exists, but who knows about it? You know, this is the history, and this is the work that Sally's doing, is to kick down the door and to unveil this history. And a lot of people don't want to hear it, especially the men in power, you know. So they replace the essence of the indigenous woman with Uncle Sam. So again, there's your paternal order at work. So, you know, for me as an indigenous woman leader, mother, grandmother, and wife, you know, I take very seriously how we move the narrative to the next generation. And it certainly has to be responsible, and it has to be founded in truth and inclusive of all perspectives that lived it. Because I remember that moment sitting on that stage with Sally Roesch Wagner and Gloria Steinem and the other ladies, and I thought, their experience is not my experience. I wasn't burning no bras during you know, that era. I didn't even have a bra to burn. So, you know, for me, it's like, you know, we have to hear, to get to the true essence of us as a human race, we got to hear all the perspectives, and we all have to be considerate and be kind to one another and celebrate each other's differences, instead of being in this competition of who is the elite top 1% of society. And today we're witnessing the crumbling of capitalism. So welcome to the new world, everyone. I don't know if I answered a question. I kind of got lost in my own. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I just must say, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that would agree with me, you're extremely articulate, and I just really am impressed with all the knowledge and information just being disseminated today. But I think that you hit upon a really good point in terms of today's current social unrest surrounding racism, and how I feel like society is really craving for not just knowledge, but accurate knowledge. And that's what you're alluding to in terms of having multiple and much more inclusive perspectives. And that idea of re-education, particularly of the youth. And I just want to strongly recommend, I don't know how many, this book, if an Indigenous people's history of the United States. I highly recommend it. It just provides an alternate perspective that's so dominant in terms of our idea of US history, and it's providing the Indigenous perspective on it. So I think that's really great. And then I don't know, since you're mentioning the youth, Mika, I don't know if you want to talk about the next question that we might have for the panelists with regard to the youth.
Yeah, all right. So my question, as we think of Allie Young, a youthful Indigenous social activist who helped lead her local community on horseback trail rides in the Navajo Nation to vote in the 2020 election, how would you encourage Indigenous youth to become more involved in the revision of US history? And do you envision the younger population participating in what types of ways in the years to come? And then I have a question for Dr. Leal. Is there a place for hip hop culture and pop culture in general to play an important role in capturing the interest of Indigenous youth?
I'd like to take a stab at that question. First of all, in my Indigenous upbringing and the stories and the narratives that our elders gave us is I would not encourage our youth to vote. The elders used to tell us the more that you participate in the system, the more that you fuel it. And so for us, we have our own system. And as part of the education is that there's also a law about free will. You can go vote, but here's the knowledge behind why our elders say don't vote is because we're separate of that system. So the more that we empower the other system, the less that we become. So I always tell the youth, don't vote, strengthen your own system, which is a proven 1,000-year-old system. It worked and it works, and it brought, what did we say in the movie, Sally? Liberty was never more perfect, and civilization never more beautiful, I guess. I always forget that line, but here's a proven model of how society can be. That's all inclusive of everybody. And so the leaders, my leaders, are chosen through the voices of the mothers, through the women that put up leaders. They have the right of nomination. They have the right of recall. They can set the agenda. They can call for war. They can call for peace. So women in a matrifocal society had that kind of power. And so it's the women that pay attention to how our boys grow and how the men behave. And it is our authority to put our leaders up. And once we put the leaders there, then the leaders will choose that one leader that'll speak for us as a nation. But for me, I don't encourage our young people to vote in an American system when it's not ours. So however, there's free will, and if they choose to, that's their choice. But for me, what I uphold is something really older than the United States of America, and I got to stick to my guns on that. And as much as that's not the reality everybody lives in right now, I have to exert my authority and say, if you're unhappy with your system and you want to change it and you want to call for ratification, then rescind your U.S. citizenship and come see me or see another Indian woman, Native American woman that's a true person of this hemisphere, and take shelter beneath her nation, because that's exactly what it was originally intended to be. So, have a mass exodus of being being a citizen of the United States and call for ratification and reform. And I know Sally's already taken me up on it, and she's gonna rescind her U.S. citizenship, and I'm gonna give her shelter underneath the Mohawk Nation under the Bear Clan, and she's gonna be protected by me, and we're gonna live happily ever after as Thelma and Louise. So there. You don't know what's different until you see it. So I'm just giving you something different. And, I'm not encouraging anybody to vote, but, if that's what people believe, then, that's the free will, that's their choice.
Thank you. My heart or my soul feels good for being able to have this discussion with all of you, but also to have someone like Mama Bear and then our elders the panel as well. I guess to go to the hip hop part of it, or to the youth and popular culture piece, and I struggle with voting also, Mama Bear. Some years I'm like, I'm not voting, I'm not doing this, and some years, I am. And I come from a tribe that's not federally recognized, and we have no anything really but we're trying. And with that being said, I think that what the answer is, obviously, and you have shown that, is our culture and our language. What we can do as young people is to learn our culture and our language. And in California, and hopefully Patty can attest to this too, is that a lot of it has been lost. And so we're in pure like revitalization mode. Specifically my community, I would say, and then the community that I live in here in Sacramento, California. And so the reason why I always use pop culture, hip hop specifically in my research is because I worked with young people. I was a young person. I guess I still am, but I was really young then. And I used it as a way for them to reclaim that, right? To bring back their cultural, practices in terms of learning about them through words, right? Or sharing art about them, of bringing back their languages by rapping in their, in their indigenous languages. And so I think that we see that pop culture, especially like right now, we're seeing a lot more indigenous people on the main screen right now. And, every day I get something from somebody showing a new film that's coming out, or, a new artist that's coming out. And I believe that, I did Bethany Yellowtail is a fashion designer, and I worked on I'll tell a little story now. I worked on a documentary. I was a story producer for the documentary about Bethany Yellowtail and her fashion design. She's Cheyenne, and I was sitting there, and I was like maybe 8 weeks pregnant while we first started filming this. And, I didn't know if I was having a boy or a girl, but I kept thinking in my head, like, I'm having a girl. Like, it felt like it was a girl. It was a boy. But anyways, but as we're filming, I'm sitting there taking notes because I'm the story producer, so I have to help tell the story. And I'm just thinking, wow, like me as a little girl had no Native women to look up to other than my family, right? Which intergenerational trauma and all that didn't necessarily make people in my family the best people to look up to. I'll just be honest. So here was Bethany Yellowtail, a young Native woman who is becoming a fashion designer, and famous people are wearing her designs, and these designs are coming from her dreams. And she's telling the Cheyenne stories about where the designs come from. And I just thought to myself, wow, my child is going to grow up in a world where she sees, because I thought it was a girl, she sees other Native women like in front of her that aren't just family, right? And so I think that that's why hip hop and pop culture can be very powerful when it comes to revitalizing languages, bringing back cultures, telling stories so that everyone can hear this story, so that it's accessible to all groups of people, but in a respectful way. At least that's the way that I look at it. I thought it was interesting that you brought up the painting of the woman, the first Native woman painting, because I purposely put this this picture up for today, and it's like the only drawing of an Esselen woman. So I just wanted to pay sorry. I just wanted to pay like respect to her today, and for you to mention that story as well. Is we don't see these images, and they're usually locked up somewhere where we can't see them. This is the only one that we have, really. And her hair is cut short. She was most likely in mourning, like lots of things that you can tell just from this drawing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And my last thing that I want to say, kind of going off because it was brought up, is these coming of age ceremonies are so crucial. They're so crucial. I have a friend, Dr. Kutcher Risling Baldley, and she's from Hoopa, Yurak Karuk, and they brought back their flower dance for the young women. And what they noticed is all of those young women that began to have their coming of age ceremony or their flower dance when they hit their moon time, have gone to college, have become linguists, have brought, things back to their community. And so my hope is that those coming of age ceremonies for young women continue and are brought back. But I also hope that the coming of age ceremonies for men are also, here in California, can be revitalized as well, because I think that there's a lot of work to do within our community for our young men. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. And so thank you for posing that question, and thank you for sharing.
I think both of your responses, Mama Bears and Melissa's, they're almost overwhelming. There's so much in them that kind of make me feel humbled in some respect, that your experiences bring forth such depth and intensity. Again, because we're tribally different. I know our youth have started crossing over clan lines to a certain degree, because not all the clans are equally faithful to who they are as that clan. So that we have begun just within the past couple years, a movement where it's based in our clan, but it's open, so that we have young women who want to become part of this renewal of the role of women in our clans. And so that we have been doing our songs with them, and we've been doing our planning with them, and it's indirectly getting some of the other clans who just kind of like somehow wandered away from it coming back, so that each of the clans can take their role and what they need to do to keep this world balanced. The political thing is a really interesting one. We're very small out here in California. I belong to the Payakwacham tribe, and we are on 6 different reservations, and 4 of us are really close together. We're all in San Diego County. The others are in a county above us. But anyway, because we're small in number as population, we do a lot of sharing. So the reservations come together and we share. And so part of our summer program 2 years ago, our kids went over to another reservation and had a really good time, did a lot of really neat things, but they came back really upset and angry to have, a sharing of what they'd learned. And they said that, they made fun of us because we didn't become a reservation until 1893, and they've been a reservation since blah, 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 blah. So, and what does that mean? Well, it said that makes them more Indian than us. I said, well, Indian isn't being on a reservation, or, Indian is who you are inside yourself, and it's how you live your life. But you know what? If you want to be a little bit nasty and mean, go back and tell them, well, Palma fought it until it got forced on them 25 years later. So we stayed free and independent 25 years longer than you. Well, I kind of got in a little bit of trouble from people actually older than me, saying you don't want to cause issues, but it's part of being Indigenous for me as an individual is that tie to the land, that tie to that mountaintop, that tie to the ravine, that tie to the valley, as part of your creation story that gives you the reason why you exist. And I've always been a little bit, not sad, but a little bit annoyed and sad, because in our creation story, we are created, the first peoples are created, humans come somewhat last. And we have a creator called Leal, and he is cremated, but his heart is eaten, and his heart is spread throughout the world because coyote defecates and drops pieces of him here and there. But he has it. But Leal is eternal living. His mother, the earth gave the last of her gifts to him for us to carry out. So part of our tradition is that because he was taken to different sections of this earth, and he was embedded into the land, the waters, the earth, and what have you, and people eat of him, they can acquire some of his knowledge. And so that is a potential brother or sister who is going to come back to the center of the earth, which is, of course, is us. And that they're going to bring the richness and the fullness of who we're meant to be as this human entity as part of the earth. So I said, well, you know, I remember one time being so frustrated because the missions came and what have you. And I said, you know, maybe the missions did have something of WIO to offer us, but Dad, burn it. How, you know, can't we be more selective and finding out, you know, what's really a part of WIO and what's not? Because we need to be, we're taught that we need to be open to all walks of life, to all different ways of being, because if it resonates with us, then that's a return to the recreation of the wholeness of the earth, and the earth will continue to grow and live and feed its people and wash its people. But you have to be able to find those little threads, because when you eat in other parts of the world, they're fed by a different truth, a different story, and you don't want to have it intermingled with yours. So we're open, and then most of the time it seems like those people ate differently than what we understood them to have eaten, and so they brought an untruth instead of a truth into our world. So we, as a consequence, we offer and take other people's in, and part of that is interacting with their systems as well. So, but we govern ourselves by custom and tradition, but we also do intertribal alliances, and if we find someone who can find the truth for us, then we will participate in the voting.
And I just want to take this time, since we only have a few minutes left, and I'm sure everybody's really enjoying the panel discussion, just to be able to have some of the questions that were popping up. There are a few of them. Let me see. There was one question from Roesch Barnes, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. There are many Black Indigenous people who are actively excluded and therefore don't know their Indigenous heritage and do not claim it because they are not claimed and they are asked to prove their heritage. How do Indigenous clans see those people today? Is there a pathway to reclaiming those roots? And I think that's open to everybody.
I think the question is difficult to answer depending on where the tribe is from. Like for us here in California, the mixture with Black or African American people was fairly recent, right? And there's a difference between how people are enrolled or accepted here in California than on the East Coast or in the South. And so in the chat, I mentioned that there's Professor Dr. Andrew Jolivet. He's from Louisiana. Well, his people are from Louisiana, and he talks about this a lot, especially right now because he's being hit with a lot of things in terms of identity policing. So I just wanted to share that. I don't, to me, if you have the heritage, the lineage in that, you're Indian. But I also don't come from a tribe that has a long history of African Americans, Blacks, African slaves being intermixed with us. So I have to acknowledge that as well.
I think every tribal nation determines how it perceives its membership. And I think there has been for the past 20 years, again, there's over 500 of us, but different tribal nations. Some have made it very much though an inclusive relationship, meaning that whomever moves into their territorial lands and becomes a part of them will share in that and eventually become part of that culture, that identity. Others might keep it restricted to one line versus another line. But part of being a tribal nation is allowing them to determine how they perceive their members are their citizens. Moving towards citizen, I think seems to give a much more inclusive sense of understanding identity and culture within that framework of who is Indian or what is Indian. And so, but again, it's like, I may kind of wonder why is it an issue for some tribes, but then I don't know their personal histories necessarily. I know in my my own tribal nation, we don't distinguish between membership because you're Black or Asian or Anglo. You have to come through that clan line, and then that clan line makes that determination. So, but then we also have a remnant of one of our last colonial things we have is we still do use blood degree, which is not all that cool necessarily, but it's really it's a tribal nation thing, and how much of it's impacted by the lived patriarchal system of the United States, and it's somehow oozing into us, or is it a part of our own tradition? It's tribal, I think.
I just want to add to that question. I know you got a lot of questions to get to. Is that is that she's right. You know, in the Haudenosaunee practice, you know, if you belong to a clan moiety, the clan moiety, and you're accepted by a family, or if a family can claim you, then you're part of that heritage. Yes, this is my granddaughter. She just wants to be part of this. She said, "Oh, yeah," and she's saying hello. But anyways, I just want to add that little bit. I can add more, but she's stealing my attention here.
Well, just due to time, since the event is over, and there's so many questions that I would love to ask you. I have a whole slew of questions. I don't know, Megan, if you can go ahead and share just the last slide so that we can make sure to have time to give thanks to everybody. Can you screen share? So like I said, there's so many questions that I wish I could ask. There are a plethora of questions actually, but this doesn't conclude our event. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time just in case they need to leave. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us today, just to have these important conversations. And if you don't mind just following us on social media with these various at different locations, Without a Whisper, and then Social Justice Equity Center, as well as the Women Soaring Project. I also wanted just to remind everybody that WSP is currently having its interactive art show that's appreciating women anti-racist. Doesn't require any artistic ability. You can just simply put somebody's name down, and we're going to be doing it until the end of March. And then Mika, you want to hop in?
All right. So please check out Dr. Wagner's, I'm going to do a book plug here, her latest publication, The Women's Suffrage Movement, and also We Want Equal Rights.
I just want to thank the opportunity to have the film with us today, and the incredible opportunity to hear from our panelists. Thank you so much. I don't know about you all, but I feel like this was such an amazing opportunity to hear a history that I think I knew part of, but clearly did not know enough of. So I'm very grateful for all that you shared and that you were able to lend to us all today. And then I also just wanted to make sure to thank our generous funders again for this event, Sierra College Library, our Sierra College Foundation, and the MiraCosta College's SJEC, Social Justice. Thank you all so very much.